There were thoughts I never said out loud, at least not in the way people would notice. There was no moment where I decided to stay quiet, no clear reason, no single conversation that made me stop speaking. It was smaller than that. It was consistent. It was quiet. It was normal. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. I spoke when I needed to. I answered when someone asked. I smiled when it made sense. Nothing about me looked silent. And yet, there were thoughts I kept to myself. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly enough to become a habit. I noticed it in the spaces between words, the second where I could have added something more, the pause where I could have been honest, the moment where I felt something real and let it pass without saying it. Those moments didn't feel heavy, not painful, not urgent, just present. I was still engaged, still responsive, but I wasn't revealing myself in the same way. Words came easily, but only the safe ones, the simple ones, the ones that didn't expose anything too personal. I could speak for minutes and still not say what was actually on my mind. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt urgent. It was more like a quiet separation, as if I had been standing inside my own thoughts for a long time, and then, without moving, I had stepped back just enough to keep them hidden. Everything around me stayed the same, but the way I participated had shifted. I paid attention to how normal I still looked. I nodded at the right moments. I laughed when it was expected. I asked the kinds of questions people like to hear. If someone had asked what I was thinking, I would have answered without hesitation, and the answer would have sounded real. That was the strange part, because inside I had thoughts that felt real, but I couldn't bring them into the open. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was something quieter, a feeling that some thoughts were not meant to be spoken, not because they were dangerous, but because they were too honest. I tried to treat it like nothing. I kept moving, kept talking, kept letting conversations unfold, but the silence stayed. I noticed it in repetition. The same people, the same settings, the same familiar exchanges, everything recognizable, yet slightly less personal. Not empty, not distant, just less exposed. As if I was present in the room, but slightly protected from it. I didn't fight it. I didn't force myself to open up. I only noticed that I was holding something back, and that awareness changed something. Because once you realize you are filtering yourself, even subtly, you start hearing your own silence. Everything continued as usual. Time moved forward. People spoke. The world kept its rhythm. And I moved within it, aware that I was speaking, but not fully revealing. I noticed it in my own voice, not in what I said, but in what I avoided. I could tell a story and realize afterward that the most important part was the part I left out. Like my words were doing their job while something deeper stayed quiet. I noticed it when I looked back on my own day. The schedule made sense. The tasks were ordinary. The conversations were familiar, but I felt slightly separated from the truth of myself inside them. Not numb, just careful, as if I had learned how to sound present without being fully seen. Even simple honesty felt different. What to admit, what to reveal, how much to share. None of it felt difficult. It just felt unnatural. I had to choose what to keep inside instead of letting it come out naturally. And that awareness was new. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a revelation. It was quiet. And because it was quiet, it was easy to ignore. But it kept returning in the same calm way, at the same moments, as if it was waiting for me to notice what I was doing. I started to notice how often I searched for a signal that it was safe to be honest, a clear invitation. a clear opening, a clear moment where the truth would fit. When it didn't appear, I didn't panic. I just stayed quiet. And that quietness changed the texture of everything. Not the conversations, not the people, just the way I moved through them and the way I left them. I didn't explain it to anyone. There was nothing to explain. But I carried the unspoken thoughts with me, quietly, through the same rooms and the same hours, aware that I was present but not fully heard. There was nothing to fix, no obvious problem to solve, no clear reason to search for. The silence didn't feel urgent. It didn't demand action. It simply existed alongside everything else. I let the days continue without correcting myself. I didn't force deeper words into my voice. I didn't try to convince myself I was fine. I didn't try to make the silence disappear. I let it sit there, quietly, like a detail I was allowed to notice. The strange thing was how normal everything still looked. People still spoke the same way. My routine still held together. My life still moved forward. And yet, something inside me remained slightly untouched, as if a part of my mind was always holding something back. The silence didn't grow stronger. It didn't fade either. It stayed subtle, almost easy to overlook if I chose not to pay attention. And maybe that was the point. Not every thought wants to be spoken. Some things stay quiet, not because they are wrong, but because they are private. They don't demand to be shared. They don't demand to be understood. They simply exist. Nothing around me needed to change. Nothing needed to be explained or justified to anyone else. I didn't need to say everything to know it was real. I simply continued, aware that there were things inside me I had never said out loud and maybe never would. I noticed how quickly my mind wanted to turn them into something safe, to soften them, to simplify them, to make them easier to say. But the thoughts didn't cooperate with that. They stayed simple. They weren't a warning. They weren't an answer. They were just truth. Quiet enough to live with, real enough to respect. And once I stopped trying to speak them, it became easier to carry them. Not because I understood them, but because I stopped demanding that I should. I kept moving through the same hours, doing the same things, with a quiet awareness underneath everything, as if I was learning for the first time that you can live a whole life while keeping certain things only for yourself. I noticed how much I keep to myself, and it stayed with me.